Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage, Puck On. Over half a century driving the people of Tipperary and surrounding areas with quality, reliable and economical vehicles, new and used. Call the sales team today to discuss your next car or van on 067 24 111.
Good Pat, welcome along to the final hour of Tip Today. Now, this week on the show, we're giving away a €200 voucher for Mr. Menswear, whether it's Debs or confirmations or communions or weddings or race days. Indeed, you'll find the perfect suit, I'm told, shoes and accessories in store in the outlets in Cashel and Care, or indeed online as well. Mr. All lowercase.ie, so it's Mr. all one word and lowercase.ie, and this is your cue to call if you want to get involved. We're looking for a finalist again today. All you have to do is text or WhatsApp Mr. plus your name and your details to us, 083 311 3311. We will announce the finalists before the end of the programme. Now, in yesterday's show, Leanne discussed simple and reliable Irish remedies for everyday ailments. Tracy Hayde was listening to the conversation and joins me now. Tracy, good morning to you.
Good morning, Fran. Thanks for having me on.
Lovely to talk to you again, Tracy. Are you into these kind of remedies?
Yeah, well, I suppose when I was young, they were always used, like the flat 7-Up when you're sick. That's another one. And then one my mother and my grandmother used to use was, if you have a sick stomach, cooled boiled water.
God, yeah, now you're taking me back
and
memories.
It works.
Huh? Yeah.
It really works if your stomach is off. Rather than medication, I think it's even better.
And did you go for the used potatoes for the warts as well that Leanne was talking to us about?
Yes, I did. When I was a child, the hands were covered, and my grandmother told me to do the potato. Basically, you cut it in half and you rub it on your warts and then bury it. And it worked. All my warts went away.
So you buried the potato afterwards?
Yeah.
It's incredible. And it worked for you?
It did. Well, I don't know if it was that, but all my warts went away.
Isn't it just amazing? And do you think, are we losing all of these remedies, do you think?
In some ways, probably, yeah, because people aren't using them as much. But, I still do the 7-Up and, say, the boiled water remedies and, even the potato, I remember it.
Yeah.
So some of them I still remember it. Like, my partner used to use cobwebs with cuts, apparently, when he was young.
Do you know, I heard about that yesterday, but I hadn't heard about it before at all. How does that work?
I don't know, he said it helps knit the cut together, so he put it on it and then bandaged over it.
Right, so you put the cobweb on the cut?
Yeah.
Right, isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
and it helps the healing process, or?
Yeah. And then another one my partner uses is lemon juice on everything from an actual lemon. Like, if he has a cut, he'll put lemon juice on it.
Ouch.
Because it will, I know, yeah.
It would sting, yeah.
But it is an antiseptic and antibacterial.
Isn't that very interesting?
Apparently.
Yeah.
But it is good for cleaning, as well.
For cleaning what now?
Like, if you're cleaning a surface, it helps disinfect the surface part.
Lemon juice?
Yeah. Lemon juice.
Right.
Same with vinegar.
And what, you dilute it in water, obviously, and...
I would imagine so.
Yeah. It's incredible, yeah.
And
I was just thinking, wouldn't a book about this be very interesting if it was all researched and gathered?
It would, definitely.
Now, probably a whole load of people will come and say, but sure, there are such books and they're all out there at the moment. But I don't know of any, but,
Nor do I.
So let's do it. We might do a dual publication of some kind, Tracy. You never know. Things are well with you, Tracy?
Yes, they're very good, yeah.
Good. Well, good to talk to you. Good to talk to you as always. And thanks very much, Tracy. Thank you. Good morning to you. 1800 938 007. Time for this.
Legal discussion on Tip Today is brought to you in association with Lynch Solicitors Clonmel, on the web at lynchsolicitors.ie and at divorceinIreland.com.
Rosemary Lynch from Lynch Solicitors, even with me in studio today. Good morning to you, Rosemary.
Good morning, Fran.
God, I'm stumbling over words and everything today. You're going to talk to us about farming and the Fair Deal scheme, and always controversial, isn't it?
It's quite controversial, yeah, and for a number of reasons. Some of them we'll dig into today. But I suppose the Fair Deal scheme if you look at the premise of it, it is supposedly supposed to support a person that needs nursing home support.
Yes.
Where the person in question pays a contribution towards their care, and the HSE or the state will pick up the balance. Where it becomes controversial is where people may be cash poor but assets rich. All right.
So typical of farming. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, in a farming context and in a business context, there's always an intergenerational element to it. They always want to, the farming clients always want to pass on land to their near and dearest, right? But sometimes you get into a sticky situation where they might have a small, by relative standards, a small farm. They're reliant on the income to support them. So they don't necessarily want to transfer away the farm and transfer away their income. But then they're worried that if they don't do that within 5 years of needing nursing home support, that that asset basically will be taken into account in the assessment, and any equity in the family home will be eaten up.
I thought there was some new rules and regulations around that, though, was it?
Yeah, there are, and it was a real welcome introduction. Now, what I would say to you is I would agree with the IFA and their recent proposals to government, where they said it hasn't gone far enough, right? So what they introduced in recent times was that in certain circumstances you can cap the assessment on the farm or a business, all right? So what that basically means, if we go down to the nuts and bolts of the financial assessment.
Yes.
So when you're making this application, and now bear in mind that this is a 36-page application, right? It's kind of like applying for a loan. In essence, it is applying for a loan, right? Everything that you'd expect your, lender to be interested in, that's what you kind of need to cover. And actually, on that point, it has happened before that, a husband making an application for a wife was unaware of one bank account. Good on the wife.
I see. Running away money, is it? Yes.
But definitely it was just like, if you think about it, the person making the application is probably quite stressed out, right?
Yeah.
They're in a kind of an emergency scenario, right? They may or may not know everything about the person's assets, right? So, it goes down to not just bank accounts, but, did the person have any shares? Everything that would fall into, assessable income, cash assets and non-cash assets, right? So best case scenario, you have somebody that's there to facilitate the application, i.e. the person that needs the nursing home care. But if you don't have access to that person because of mental debility or something like that, it gets a bit difficult, all right? And if you do accidentally not disclose something in your form, all right, what the nursing support scheme does after that person dies is they ask for a full copy of everything that you're submitting to probate. And as we know, if you're in a probate scenario, again, obviously revenue want to know what is in this person's estate. If there's any difference between what the person has submitted on the Fair Deal application and on the probate application, they'll look to claw back some funds there.
Wow.
So it's very, very, very important in a Fair Deal context that, the person has somebody that they know that would be ultimately making that application for them, aware of what their assets are if they're in that kind of emergency scenario. So again, just going back to, I suppose, the nuts and bolts of it, as I said, the assessable income, right? So they look at pensions, social welfare benefits, rental, all of that. And if you're an individual, you make an 80% contribution, all right, towards your care based on your assessable income, which sounds like a lot.
Sounds like an awful lot.
And indeed, it can be a lot if you think about it, right? One query I get a lot with Fair Deal is, I've put my loved one into Fair Deal and I thought the scheme covers everything. But yet there's certain services that the nursing home provides, like specialised treatments, that aren't covered under the scheme, right? So if 80% of your income is going towards your Fair Deal contribution, and there's certain types of treatments that you may want to avail of that aren't covered under the scheme, that's coming out of the 20% that you've retained. The other things like, some nursing homes provide hairdressing services, things
Yes,
like that.
the
You know what I mean?
extras.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the extras. They're not covered under the scheme.
Yeah, is there also a percentage of the assets, the value of the assets per year, is it on top of the 80%? Is that it?
Yeah. So it's kind of twofold. The first one is the income, right? And as I said, 80% if you're an individual, or 40% if you're in a couple, right?
Yes.
So a couple is someone who's married, obviously, but it can also be kind of like a cohabitant, right? It's a life partner that you've lived with for 3 years. So in that circumstance, 40% of the combined income. So that's step one in the financial assessment. Step two in the financial assessment then is looking at, you, as you said, at assets, right? So there's two types of assets under the financial assessment. The first is the cash assets. So think about savings, shares, things like that. All right. And the second is non-cash assets, which we spend most of our time thinking about, right? It's the family home, it's farmland, it's secondary property, things like that. And with those two, the assessment is 7.5% of the value of those, all right, is put towards.
Right. How fair in the fair deal scheme is that, though? Because again, you could be very much cash poor and have, I don't know, 200 acres of land or something.
Yeah. Well, what I've seen is it can result in quite a bit of unfairness in the farming context, right? As I said, you know, a lot of the time, what happens is that the farming client would have wanted to have transferred it to, you know, their successor. They have an ultimate successor in mind,
Yeah.
but they haven't gone through the mechanism to do it, right? So the recent introduction, the positive change, let's say, as I said, the IFA says it doesn't go far enough, and I would agree, is that similar to the cap on a family home, right, where after 3 years it will roll out of the assessment, so it will no longer be counted as an asset. That's automatic on the family home, all right? But they've made provision on farming or business assets that you can, if you appoint an ultimate successor and you meet all of the conditions and criteria, that you can also apply a cap to the farm, all right? The issues that I've come across and some of the unfairness there, right, is that if you think about it, we're dealing with people that are, you know, later on in life.
Yes.
All right. They may not have been actively farming it. All right. So in order to go through this 3-year cap for the farm, you do need to have been actively farming it for 3 of the last 5 years, or your ultimate successor will need, or your successor will need to have done that, or your partner will need to have done that. So what you'll find in Ireland is that in some farming families or in some contexts, you know, you might have a bachelor farmer that doesn't have a successor in mind,
Yes.
that may have leased the land on a long lease and is generating an income from it. They won't qualify for that. It has to be, you know, actively farmed by the person themselves or one of those relatives, as I said. So if it's to a third party, you're out.
If you've signed over at this point, I mean, if you have chosen your succession path and you've signed over, what about that?
Yeah, kind of 3 scenarios arise under that, really. So the first one is, as I said, you haven't signed it over and you're trying to fit in within this rule. In my opinion, it's not a great position to be in.
Yeah.
The second one is you have signed it over, right? But you haven't signed it over within the 5-year look back period. Okay.
Okay, so that's in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what they say is an asset that they can assess, right, is anything that you currently own or that you've transferred in the previous 5 years if you haven't transferred for value.
Okay.
All right. Because if you think about it, if you've transferred for value, you have the asset in a different form. You have it as a cash asset, hopefully.
Yes.
So most farming clients, if they have done the transfer and they're in that scenario, they're kind of caught by that, right? So what you still need to do is you still need to appoint a successor and go down that route. But instead of, let's say, it being caught for the full term, you'll only be caught for a limited amount of it. But it can still lead to a difficult scenario where the person's means or the person's assets are being assessed as if they still own that land, right? So then they may need to rely on the ancillary loan that the HSE offer, right? And that's basically just a charge on the family home, all right? People sometimes think of that's actually, oh God, I have to do that. I have to put a charge on my property. You don't have to do it. It's optional. But it's only when the assessment is in such a way that you can't possibly pay your contribution because your assets, you're as I said, kind of asset rich and cash poor. So they need to rely then on the ancillary loan, which just defers your cost of care. So they still get the refund, they still get paid, but they don't get paid until the person's died. And the issues and some of the unfairness that I see in that one, right, is that you only have 12 months from the date of death, all right, to repay. And if you think about it, like most fixed assets, like most properties, if you go to an auctioneer, well, probably today because it's a sunny day, it would be all right. But if you had gone to him in January or February and said, I need to sell this property ASAP, he would have said, hold off until the weather's better. All right. So you kind of have a ticking clock then over your head to sell a property. And what can happen is sometimes you won't realise as much from the sale as you should have, which means the beneficiaries don't get as much as they should have.
See, it sounds to me like planning and financial advice is absolutely key to this, way ahead of time.
Exactly. And it's something, again, not to be adding in too many things to our wills procedure, but it is something that, when you're talking about wills with a client, you do have that discussion if they're of a certain age. When they're saying, well, I want to leave this to leave an acre to my son, for example, and I want to do this and I want to do that. And you're kind of saying, well, there is a CGT relief available for an acre to your son. Do you not want to do it now? Because if you don't do it now, you might be ultimately paying for it in the end via the fair deal. And the worst case scenario with fair deal is that a person has to actually start selling assets.
Yes.
And or that the person who they wanted to benefit doesn't ultimately benefit under the will because there's a fair deal charge that needs to be paid off.
So what is the current situation? I mean, are farmers struggling with this in terms of qualifying, I guess, and the cap as well? Is that proving to be an issue?
Yeah, it is. I mean, in terms of an introduction, this new cap for the farmer has only been in place in relative recent times, right? So there's still a lot of ambiguity. There's still things cropping up. For example, Fran, just today the question came in, well, these new rental rules coming in place into March 1st just came in, which basically grants 6-year security of tenure. Yeah. So the question was, well, how does that work with fair deal? Because under fair deal, right, you have to sell your property potentially to pay off the loan within the 12 months. So what if I have a tenant that I can't evict? And what if I can't get them out?
Well, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that.
And all of those, that's the thing with changes of legislation. Sometimes they impact different areas that you don't initially thought. And I thought it was a really good query, actually, that hit my desk. So thankfully, they've carved out the fair deal property. But you can just see that these little changes and the little nuances as you go, they can kind of, result in things that you hadn't thought through in advance. But the most frequent one, unfortunately, causing people issues, and the part that I would say is unfair, is if a client has gone through the bother of going in and getting their affairs in order and making that transfer, all right, but then unfortunately, for a reason that they haven't anticipated, right? It's not like they've done it and that they're, unwell at the time.
Yeah.
But then they're caught by that 5-year look-back period. That's one of the things that the IFA is saying that they want to reduce, all right, to a 3-year period or less.
Right. There's no doubt that fair deal is a crucial social support right across the board, but there is still a lot more to be ironed out, you think, yeah?
There's a lot more to be earned out, and I personally think the look back period is it penalises people, right? Like we're actively telling people through the reliefs available for farmers to do these transfers, right? I don't think that they then should be somewhat penalised if they haven't done it at the right time.
Yes.
You know, having made those steps, which, let's face it is a big step to take. You know, you are ultimately divesting yourself of your source of income, or of the land that you may have farmed for 30 or 40 years. So I don't think that they should be penalised in that way.
All right. Somebody's saying, I live with my mum in the family home. If my mum had to go into a home, I suppose it's a fair deal, would we have to sell the family home?
Yeah, see, that's an interesting one, and actually one
Isn't
that
it?
cropped
Yeah.
up recently. You can defer in very limited circumstances, right, this payback within 12 months. Now, remembering for the listener that it may or may not be the case that your mother needs to avail of the ancillary loan. It may or may not be the case, depending on her income and her assets, that she may need to put a charge on the property, right? But let's assume that she has had to do that. You can defer the 12-month period if you have, in very limited circumstances, a vulnerable person or a dependent person living in the property.
Yes.
But that's not a given, all right? And that needs to be looked at in advance, because if you don't make that payment within the 12 months and it was necessitated and they wouldn't waive it, interest starts to accrue from that at 0.0219% per day. So it's something
Per
that you
day?
need to not assume will apply to you. Do the investigations, check it out and make sure.
You were talking about the extra charges. One listener says, my dad was in a nursing home for nearly 5 weeks until God called him home. They charged €80 a week for laundry, even though my dad was bedbound and only wore a polo shirt. So these are the extras you were referring to, yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my condolences. And yeah, that is the experience of a lot of people. They assume that once you have done all of the, I wouldn't say palaver because that's a bit unfair, but once you've gone through this 36-page form and you've ticked every box and you've got all the financial statements, that you're kind of have everything sorted, whereas actually there's a lot of costs that people don't anticipate that do start cropping up.
Right.
And as I said, if a person only has access to 20% maybe of their income, it will fall on family members.
With the lobbying from the farming organisations, will we see further changes, do you think?
Well, I hope so, right? But the other thing that I really hope and that I think is crucial is I've yet to meet a client, right, that I'm talking about an enduring power of attorney or their will or anything else that says to me, yeah, I'm happy to go into a nursing home. Right, they always say I want to be supported at home for as long as possible.
Yeah, of course.
There's a load of research in Japan, Sweden and loads of other places that basically says that from a mental health perspective for all involved in that kind of process, it's better to do home support. Now, the government has been talking about a scheme that would be similar to the Fair Deal scheme, but in a home care context. And I think that is absolutely crucial. There's a lot of people, that are going into nursing homes that may, if there was the correct supports in place, because the current support, it's discretionary and it's limited. If there was the correct supports in place for home care instead, wouldn't be in a nursing home.
All right. One of our listeners wants to drag you into a political row. Just wondering, what do you think about this, that people pay their taxes all of their lives, and particularly elderly people, they deserve to be looked after afterwards? I presume you go along with that, would you?
Oh, I'd wholeheartedly agree. Obviously, to play devil's advocate, but there has to there was a revenue report back in 2020, and it just detailed the cost of care,
Yes.
right? And it is
with an ageing population.
Yeah,
and all that,
it's massive, right? But do I think that our tax money, having spent tax and paid tax all their life, should be put towards the elderly? Absolutely, I do.
All right. If people want advice from you or from your colleagues, Rosemary,
yeah, be happy to hear
contact the
from
office. All right. So if you want to Google Lynch Solicitors, all of the contacts will be there. Good to see you as always, Rosemary.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed. We'll take a break. We're back with more. It's 11:30.
Tipp FM's Tip Today.
With Slattery's Garage Puckon. Now is the time to pick up your next van. From the award-winning Peugeot Partner van to the Expert and the load-lugging Boxer van. We have big vans, high roof vans, long wheelbase vans. You'll find them all at Slattery's Garage Puckon. See slatterysgarage.ie.